Hello, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Tim Newton from the Krannert School. This event is being brought to you by the Global Supply Chain Management Initiative in the Krannert School of Management and the Department of Agricultural Economics in the College of Agriculture. As we know, COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on worldwide health. It's also provided a major challenge to the global economy. A large component of that disruption has come in the supply chain. Shoppers have felt the impact from scarcity of some items to increased cost for others. And these shocks, while hopefully temporary in nature, may lead to permanent changes in consumer behavior. We have three experts with us today to discuss the supply chain issue, and all three have been widely quoted and cited during the pandemic. Ananth Iyer is the Susan Bulkeley Butler Chair in Operations Management at the Krannert School. He's also a Senior Associate Dean in the school. Ananth joined the Purdue faculty in 1996 and also serves as the director of the Dauch Center for the Management of Manufacturing Enterprises and the Global Supply Chain Management Initiative. Jayson Lusk is a distinguished professor and head of the Department of Agricultural Economics in the College of Agriculture. He originally joined Purdue in 2003 and then returned in 2017 after spending 12 years at Oklahoma State University. Jayson is a food and agricultural economist who studies what we eat and why we eat it. Mohammad Rahman is an associate professor of management at the Krannert School. He joined the Purdue faculty in 2004. Mohammad's research interests include omnichannel retailing, digital business, and consumer behavior, and he was named in 2017 as one of the world's top business professors under 40 by Poets and Quants. Each of our panelists will make a few brief remarks about the current pandemic for the first half of the hour. In the remaining time, we'll answer questions from the audience. You can post a question by clicking on the comment link below the screen. It would also be helpful if you could indicate which panelist the question is aimed toward. We'll answer as many questions as we can during our time. With that, let's turn it over to our first speaker. Here to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the global supply chain is Professor Ananth Iyer.
Thank you, Tim. It's wonderful to join my panelists, Jayson and Mohammad, to talk about food supply chains. I'm going to get us started with a few remarks about food supply chains. And one of the things I want to get us to think about is how food supply, what is the supply chain associated with food, and how should we be thinking about this question? So a real question to think about is, what is supply chain management? And a way to think about it is all the entities that are involved in going from upstream to downstream, where downstream is the customer. So if you're thinking food, you can think of the farm as the initial entity. There's a distributor of food. There's a chain warehouse that stores the food. There's a retail store, and there's a customer. And what makes it a chain is the flow that's required between all these entities to get food to the customer. But notice that this is not the only way that flows happen. You could also have things go from the farm to a processing plant to a distributor to make its way all the way to the customer. You may already be hearing about issues with respect to meat processing, etc. Well, that is another chain that's a supply chain in the food supply chain. You can also think about other products that you buy at a retailer, which may be food or non-food items. You can think of chips, soda, paper towels, etc. And those things also make their way through the supply chain. So when we think supply chain, we think about all of these possible flows. Now, what makes it interesting? What makes it interesting is that there are a bunch of features. One is fragmented ownership. There are very few vertically integrated entities that cover all the steps. There are many companies involved. The second is, in the US market, there's intense retail competition, which basically means you have many choices. You could go to Walmart, you can go to Kroger, you can go to Meijer, many places to buy food. As a result of that, retail gross margins are about 20 to 25%, and the net margins are 0.5 to 2.5%. It's a tough business to be part of because of the extent of competition. And competition also causes stores to carry a lot of items, over 30,000 SKUs. And that basically means US retail, grocery retail, involves tremendous choice. And choice is something people have gotten used to. So stores compete based on price, availability, convenience, freshness, etc. Each one of you can think about which store you go to, and you choose the store that best works for you. The main focus of supply chain managers is to match supply with demand. So when a customer goes to the retail store, they get the variety they want at the price point they want available when they're there. Now, the issue is that if you look at the store itself, there are many different paths to the store. And one is that while stores may have 2 to 3 weeks worth of inventory, across the supply chain, past studies have shown a lot of inventory, 80 to 120 days. Where this inventory sits varies. Some of it is in the retailer, some in the distributor, some in the manufacturer, etc. And one of the things that causes all this inventory is what's called forward buying. Manufacturers in the past used to offer trade promotions or price cuts to incent various distributors to carry inventory. So the good news with all of this is there is a lot of inventory in the system. So even if manufacturers were to stop temporarily, there is a lot of inventory. And the key is that the paths to the store vary. Sometimes retail stores get inventory from chain warehouses. At other times, they get direct store delivery by a manufacturer. Coke, Pepsi, various snack foods, sometimes milk, bread, gets delivered directly to the store by the manufacturer. And some of the inventory is actually owned by the supplier. Spices, the spice rack, is typically owned by the distributor, McCormick or Crown or whoever they might be, and they then see to it there's a tremendous amount of variety. So this is really the supply chain as it existed. So what are the challenges and what are stores doing during the pandemic? Now, many of you might remember pictures of store shelves that were empty and a big run on toilet paper. One of the things to note is that for the supply chain to function, every element needs to function. And what is every element? We've talked about the entities, but we need things to move. So we need trucks and truck drivers. We need warehouse employees to be able to pick and pack. We need store employees to restock the shelves. And all of these were roles with very little automation. Perhaps of these roles, warehouses were ones with more automation, but the rest of it had very little automation. And the question really during this pandemic was, how do we protect the health of all of these associates so they're able to function? And many of you can recall discussions taking place in the news about warehouses and people getting infected and all of these sort of questions. And that was the challenge. This also goes back all the way to the farm, and Jayson knows a lot more about that than I do, where similar issues with respect to lack of automation and with a lot of people working in close proximity in the farms and processing plants for meat have issues of this kind. So those were the challenges. Now, what has happened? Clearly, you've heard of incentive pay, sometimes called heroes pay, that was offered to people. Protective gear, many stores are having plexiglass shields, they're having one-way flow, etc. And work processes being restructured to trade off efficiency for safety. Now, clearly, this is not quite a trade-off because safety of the employees is crucial. But it's worth thinking about that this is a conscious trade-off that manufacturers have had to do or retailers have had to do. And this creates costs that somebody has to bear. And then there are real-time checks, employee temperature, paid sick leave, etc. And finally, and this is the part that's the toughest for retailers, retailers depended on merchandising. Customers were used to free samples, talking to people for help, etc. And many of those had to be minimized in order to protect the health of the associates while still keeping the stores running. So now, one of the questions has always been, are customers being rational when they're stocking up? And my view with this is to basically say it's best to think about customers as rational because we can try to tease out the reasons why they may be stocking up. So customers were stocking up because their consumption increased. So If you look at the food category, over 50% of the food consumed was outside the home. Now, most of the food is consumed in the home. So clearly, food that would have gone to restaurants and other locations, cafeterias, is now being consumed in the home. People are worried about price increases. That's been less a concern now because things have stabilized. But people are concerned about price increases, and they say, let me stock up now before the prices go up. They were worried about when next they can come to shop. Would the store still be open? And they were worried about stock up. So these were all reasons for customers to stock up. And so the main thing for retailers to think about is what can we do to reduce the stockpiling? And stores have been doing a variety of things. They've been capping purchase quantity, but they permit you to order in advance. They've been enabling omni-channel fulfillment, and Mohammad's going to cover that, so I'm not going to talk about this because he's the expert in that domain. But they've also been communicating with customers about product substitution, about issues with respect to volumes and pack sizes, etc. And they're also reserving time for vulnerable customers to shop. So what stores are trying to do is to adaptively improve the way customers can get access. Now, one little detail is that historically, customers never had to inform the store what they plan to purchase. But the moment customers can inform stores of what they plan to purchase, it makes satisfying customer demand much easier. So what does the future look like? My guess is there's going to be more automation in the store. My guess is we're going to see robots moving around to check inventory levels and fulfill orders. Walmart has a Bossa Nova robot, which goes around checking inventory. Target has announced those things. We're going to see robots. IBM has announced video tracking to enable social distancing to count the number of people in the store. Many stores are implementing one-way aisles, greater use of online ordering and pickup, greater role in food prep. That is, it's stores wanting to do food prep in order to make life easier for customers. My guess is there's going to be a greater level of in-store customer experiences to get people to the store while allowing them to operate safely. One question, and I think I'll have Jayson or Mohammad talk about, is whether customers would be more interested in chain of custody tracking of food. Who touched my food? How has it been treated? What pesticides have been used? And all of those kinds of things. There are many research questions, which I'll sort of very briefly touch on. One of the questions is, will store cleanliness be a competitive requirement? Will technology use be more common and accepted? Self-scan, self-checkout robots, etc. And a real question, which I think is something that I think on the food side, everybody there should be proud of, is that I really think that the retail grocery supply chain did come through, and the entire food ag industry should be thanked for doing a wonderful job in supporting everybody through this pandemic. So I'm going to stop at this point and turn it over to Jayson, and then we'll go from there. Jayson, over to you.
Thanks for that, Ananth. Always good to hear what you have to say on these issues. So I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I thought I'd just share a few thoughts from my perspective. I think there's been a lot of focus on the impacts of the coronavirus disruptions on the food consumer, and I think those are very legitimate and real, and I'll talk about those in a second. But I want to spend just a couple of seconds talking about the farm side of things. And whatever hit consumers have taken, I would argue that farmers have probably taken an even bigger hit. So the USDA releases projections of net farm income. The last time they did that were in February, and they were projecting that farm income for this coming year was going to be fairly flat. But it's hard to imagine that we're not going to come down significantly, given that the prices of most agricultural commodities, things like corn, soybeans, cattle, hogs, have been falling precipitously pretty much across the board. Moreover, this is not just the case this year, but for the last several years, there has been an increasing reliance on government payments. First, it was the trade payments, the so-called market facilitation payments. And then in the CARES Act, there are some payments to help compensate farmers for some of the losses they've experienced. In my Department of Agricultural Economics here at Purdue, the Center for Commercial Agriculture does a monthly survey of farmers. It's called the Purdue Ag Economy Barometer. My colleagues Jim Mintert and Michael Lingemeyer run this. What they do is they measure farmer sentiments, over 500 farmers every month, and ask their perceptions of this, how the ag economy is going. And what we noticed in April was that it dropped to its lowest level in over 3 years. It had tumbled 40% in the past 2 months alone. We also on that survey, we asked farmers about their perceptions of the impact of the coronavirus on their farm's profitability this year. 39% of farmers said they were very worried, and 28% said fairly worried. So that's more than 2/3 worried about the impacts of coronavirus on their farm's profitability. So let me take a little bit of a step back and maybe touch on a few of the things that Ananth mentioned, but maybe share with you how I view what's happened in terms of disruptions to the food supply chain. I think there have been really two distinct periods of disruptions. The first occurred in mid to late March. This was mainly caused by a demand shock. So food away from home was essentially shut down, and then we had a peak of demand hit grocery stores. And that caused a lot of disruption. Ananth already pointed this out, that the way we deliver food to restaurants and cafeterias is different than the way we deliver food to the grocery store. So there were supply chains issues, there were capital constraints within food processing firms. But my sense is that this was a temporary phenomenon. Again, it's a significant demand shock in two different ways. And within a matter of weeks, really, I think the grocery sector, the food processing sector, worked through that situation in a very effective way, and grocery stores started looking much more the way we're accustomed to seeing them within a matter of weeks. Now, at the same time, there were some problems at the farm level, and this mainly had to do with the fact that some commodities were being plowed under, some vegetables. You probably saw some images of milk being dumped, and this primarily had to do with the fact that overall demand was shrinking. Even though there was a demand spike in the grocery store, there were many products that have significant shares of their produce destined for food away from home, particularly some vegetable providers. And when that demand disappears, when it gets destroyed, there's nowhere else for it to go. In some cases like milk, it was some logistics at the processing level. But as I indicated, we largely worked through that problem. The second major wave of disruptions was from a supply shock, and this occurred in the meat processing sector. So really beginning in about early April, what we saw is that some big meat processing plants began to close or slow down. So a couple of important things for you to realize about the meat processing sector. First, it's very concentrated in the sense that we have a handful of large plants that do most of the processing in this country. So to give you some statistics, the 10 largest beef processing plants process about 60% of all cattle. On the pork side of things, it's the 15 largest pork plants process about 60% of all hogs. So any one of these plants is big enough that when it goes down, it has significant market disruptions. The second thing to understand about these plants is that they're very labor intensive. The largest plants will employ between 3,000 and 4,000 workers in a single location. Because they're working in refrigerated environments, this is expensive square footage, so the incentive is to have workers in close proximity to each other. And it appears that this environment with densely packed workers in refrigerated environments with recirculated air is one in which apparently the coronavirus could easily spread. So that's what we started seeing, and really the most significant challenges were really about the first of this month, about the 1st of May. Both beef and pork processing were running about 40% below where they were at the same time last year. So that's a significant supply shock. And what we saw was livestock prices falling significantly. The demand for cattle and hogs wasn't there because the plants couldn't run that many animals through. At the same time, because there was less meat being placed on the market, wholesale meat prices were going through the roof, frankly. Wholesale beef prices reached a level we haven't seen and recorded in at least the last 20 years, which is the data I have on my computer. Pork prices likewise reached very significant levels. The good news is in recent days, we've started to get a bit of a handle on this. So workers have been distanced in plants, partitions have been erected, temperature testing. I think Ananth already mentioned some of these things. And we've been able to get some of these plants back online. So I looked as of Friday, just a few days ago, We had improved from 40% below to beef cattle. We were about 20% below last year, and pork we're about 10 to 15% below last year. So we've made some very significant improvements, and we're also seeing that push back a little bit on prices have finally started to come down here a little bit. So maybe I'll just end with a comment. I think for folks that don't work in agriculture or know much about the meat processing sector, I think it's hard to get a sense of scale and why the solutions have been so difficult to deal with. I think there have been some notions like, well, why don't we just send all these extra animals to your local butcher shop, okay? So let's think about this. We in this country have a processing capacity of processing about 500,000 hogs a day, every single day. So if we're running at 40% capacity, that means there's 200,000 extra hogs that were intended to go to market that didn't go. Now, if you keep doing that for 5 days, which we did, now that's 1 million extra hogs that were intended for market that didn't go. So what are the challenges? Well, the first one is, any one of these big plants might process close to 20,000 hogs a day. So let's suppose your local butcher can do even 20. That local butcher would then have to run for 1,000 days to make up for the lost production of 1 day of these large packing plants. Even if you had a more medium-sized processor that could do 200 hogs a day, they would need to run for 100 days, or you need 100 new processors to make up for the lost capacity in one of these plants. So that's the big challenge. The other big challenge that emerged, of course, is I mentioned the 1 million pigs that backed up just from 1 week, and we went much longer than that, is it creates some real challenges in the supply chain. The hog production supply chain works on almost a just-in-time delivery system. We have pigs that are being born today because of breeding decisions that happened 3 months ago. In good times, those pigs have a schedule. They're planned to stay in a farrowing house, then a nursery, and then a feeder house, and then go to market. But when the pigs at the end don't leave, there's nowhere for the new pigs coming in to enter. I think that's the important thing to realize about agriculture, is that there are biological lags that occur. You can't produce a new pig in an instant, and pigs that you've made breeding decisions in the past are going to show up. And that's part of the challenge in dealing with these disruptions, both on the demand side and the supply side, is agricultural decisions take months, sometimes years, to have consequences. So in the pork sector, I think that due to the backup of hogs, there was a big problem, and we had some issues where producers were trying to slow down growth. They were increasing stocking density. The problem with that, of course, is that can cause some animal welfare problems, which is nothing that is something you want to avoid as much as possible. And then the worst, last option that no producer wants to undertake, but has happened a bit, is that some hogs had to be euthanized because simply there was nowhere for them to go. Hopefully we've turned the corner on that and seen the worst of that. So those have been the two major disruptions. My hope is that by and large we've worked through some of these things, but I think even going out into the future, as I look at our food processing sector, I can talk, maybe in the Q&A about what are some of the solutions at the processing level. I think the challenges we'll have in the next few months have to deal with the fact that we're likely in a recession. Consumers' incomes have fallen and people are out of work, and that affects what people buy and how they choose to shop. And that will, of course, have implications for the food sector going forward. So I think I'll stop my remarks there, but certainly happy to talk more about any of these issues in the Q&A.
There we go. Thank you very much, Jayson. Before we get to our final panelist of the day, who is Mohammad Rahman, I wanted to remind everyone we're getting a lot of comments, and we thank you for that. In fact, I'm going to, as soon as we get through Professor Rahman's comments, we'll let you know we've got people tuning in from all over the world today, which is one of the great things about these webinars we're able to do. If you have a question for any of our panelists and you're watching on the live presentation, please type your question into the comment section, and we'll get as many of those here in the next half hour or so as we can. But first, we're going to hear from Mohammad Rahman. He's going to talk about how the virus has affected consumer behavior and how companies will adapt to that change. So go ahead, Mohammad.
Well, thanks, team Ananth and Jayson, for joining this panel. It's really a great pleasure to join this panel to talk about, I guess, what consumers have been doing and what our retailers have been doing. So let me start with sort of, I think when we talk about retailers, of course, Ananth and Jayson sort of touched a lot on the grocery stores and the food retailers, but we also have a lot of the retailers that are like clothing, shoes, and beauty and other products. So for the grocery sector, I think our retailers have done a pretty good job of really adjusting to the omni-channel shift they had to do. It was happening in the last couple of years slowly, but I think, you know, what we have seen is our major sort of retailers like Walmart, Kroger, Meijer, they have really picked up very quickly and were very able to sort of give us the option to order online, have the shoppers to pick up the groceries, and sort of allow cart pickups or deliveries with Instacart and other service providers. Now, the omni-channel shopping behavior is sort of a trending thing. Retail is always about trends, right? So, and with trends, what happens, you have a part of the consumers that are going to be at the forefront of the trends, and then you have some consumers that are still going to be in the traditional ways. And that's what we saw with the other retail sectors. So I guess some numbers that Macy's put out, 80% of their sales or revenue was coming from foot traffic. Now, when you are in a situation of lockdown, that's a problem. Now, we know that, you know, like the retailers have been trying to move online. Some have been successful more than others. And what we are seeing is that, well, these retailers are now really trying to pick up on that as well. So when we think about the other retailers like clothing retailers or department stores, I think they've been able to sort of pick up to some extent. Now, the challenge is what will happen going forward. I mean, what is the value of the stores? I think for grocery sector, we can be assured that people will still go to grocery, they'll still probably go pick up, we'll still need stores. But then what happens with stores, and I think this is a question that's bothering a lot of us, and we see JCPenney just filing for bankruptcy protection on Friday. And I think today, Wall Street, the headline is, you know, like the consumer spending is going down significantly. There's a lot of price pressure. So what would happen with consumers adjusting to this new reality is a good question of what can retailers do. And I think I'm going to go back to, again, this trend-setting part of the retail. So a good strategy has to sort of take care of the trend-setting consumers as well as the consumers that are not going to be at the forefront of the trend. So if we think about the omni-channel retail, a lot of people are very comfortable buying online. They could really figure out whether or not the product actually fits them. But then there is a significant number of consumers who are still not very comfortable figuring out whether or not the clothing they're buying online is going to fit them. The shoes that are ordering are going to fit them. The beauty products, you know, whether or not they need to try them before they buy them. Now, with that, so the challenge for the retailers now is how do I really transition all these consumers that are not very comfortable to interact with me digitally, and also make sure the value of my stores are still preserved, because there is a lot of competitive advantage of having stores and giving the right experience. And I think Ananth talked about some of the experiences in terms of competing. I mean, yes, pricing is one component, but pricing, if that's the only component retailers compete on, they're going to be dead. I mean, they're going to be a partner in competition. We're not going to see profit. So they have to rely on other factors. Now, when we think about these other factors, the combination needs to be providing service that people care about. Now, when I think about the things people care about, one of the key things our retailers need to worry about is how do we translate sort of product knowledge from offline product knowledge or products that people have bought previously. How does it translate with new products they're looking at? So if I bought a pant that's Calvin Klein brand, if I'm looking at a different brand now on Macy's website or Nordstrom website, how do I know whether or not this new pair of slacks would fit me well, given what I have done before? So this product knowledge transformation is critical as we think about people's uncertainty about products. And a lot of times when people are looking for products that are more fact-based, the consumers are going to demand more facts, and probably if you can give a lot of facts, their uncertainty will be resolved and they'll be okay with transacting online. So if you're thinking about products like laptops or electronics, or a lot of the printers, things like that, you will see that, well, if you provide enough facts, people can make that decision and they can actually do well. And this is where we saw that Best Buy actually has done relatively well with this COVID situation, because they were able to get orders online and then do curbside deliveries. But now in clothing or other retail sector, the challenge is how can we take people's behavior from the past and see if they can make these decisions for the new products they're looking at. And I think this is where retailers are lagging to some extent. We need to think about concierge services at a larger scale. So a lot of the leading retailers like Nordstrom and others, they have these stylist services for select customers. But I guess moving forward, we need to see technologies actually taking that role so you can scale it and actually make it available for all sorts of consumers. So if you see the consumers have had difficulty in sort of figuring out their fit with products, so they bought and they return more, well, try to see if you can help them with the kind of product they may be looking at. Relatively, like if you bought some shoes that was 7.5 size before, you're looking at a new brand, can you see, okay, well, maybe 7.5 is not going to be the right fit. Maybe you suggest, well, you look at 8 proactively. If those sort of knowledge would be really important to move our customers to become more comfortable. And that comfort is critical to make sure customers have a good experience. Otherwise, what we're going to see is a lot of return. And we're going to go back to the problems that Ananth and Jayson are talking about in terms of supply chain and manufacturing. I mean, if we have a lot of customers buying a lot of different products just to figure out whether or not the size fits me, and if it's like one customer needs to get 3 items to figure out the size of one, I mean, you can see how many extra things you're already selling and you're creating trouble for the manufacturing system and the inventory system. And for fashion and for a lot of these, time is the essence. It's not something that once you get the return, you can resell it, because once the style is obsolete, it's probably not gonna get the same price. So it's very critical that the retailers think about it. And I think the other thing is I see that a lot of stores are now opening, which is a good thing. They're really providing a lot of the safety measures in terms of, I think Nordstrom announced that they're going to quarantine any clothes consumers are trying for 48 hours to 72 hours before they actually let some others actually try it. Now, I think this sounds great, but I was thinking about it. So think about 100 different customers going to the store, trying 100 different shirts. Now, when the next day, the new 100 people go in there, you won't really have things to try because these are all in quarantine back somewhere for 48 hours to 72 hours. So this is where you're going to have some trouble. And this is where I think going back to Ananth's point about having some idea about what is going to happen, what kind of demand you're going to see is very critical. And this is here again, I think what retailers can do is provide like a test driving kind of scenario. Our auto retailers have been doing this for many years now because auto retailers have not been really able to sell cars online. What they do is they give a lot of information about cars. People come back with a set of products, they narrow down their consideration set, and then they make appointments to go try those cars. I think our retailers need to sort of think about digital tools like these digital concierge services where they can allow customers to narrow the consideration set and then think about making appointments. And we're hearing from health officials that, you know, like outdoor is safer than inside. So consumers who are on the fence about going to the stores, we really need to make sure these consumers are comfortable shopping around. Well, you may be thinking about setting up tents outside and making appointments so you can actually have them come and see the clothing or the products, feel the fabric, and then be comfortable about shopping. And once they're there, they probably would be also okay going inside. Because once people see that you have taken the right kind of actions, they'll be okay to go inside. But right now, sitting at home, people are worried about their safety. People don't know if they should be going there even at all. So I think what we're gonna see is definitely a lot of consumers becoming more and more reliant on online stuff. But unless we really take steps proactively to make sure the consumer product fits are taken care of when they're buying online, these retailers are gonna have a huge issue with returns and supply chain management. Because if consumers are ordering a lot of products just for the sake of trying to find whether or not the product fits them, whether or not it looks good, this is going to be a problem in terms of going forward. So I think the critical thing here for going forward is we should expect the consumers are going to change. We're going to see a lot more consumers being a lot more comfortable doing online shopping, whether it's grocery ordering, whether it's just clothing, shoes, whatnot. But how do we make sure that we create value for the trend-setting customers as well as the more traditional customers in combining the store in the mix is going to be the sort of the critical thing for retailers to survive through this COVID and going forward.
All right, thank you very much, Ananth, Ananth, Mohammad, and Jayson for your comments. We have a lot of questions coming in, as you might expect. I wanted to say hello to, we have people not only around the country right now tuning in, we've got Indiana, Wisconsin, Georgia, Michigan, Colorado, Illinois, North Carolina, and Iowa represented. And internationally, we're getting viewers today from Peru, Tanzania, Mexico, and Taiwan. So to everyone, we say hello and please be safe. We're going to do a round robin here of questions to all of our panelists. We do want to remind everybody we may not get to all of the questions today. You can see a replay of this. We'll have it on the Krannert YouTube and the Krannert website channels. Also, it will stay up on Facebook Live. So if you missed anything or if you want to share this with your friends, please do so. So I'm going to get to as many of these as I can. And the first question is for Professor Iyer. What are some of the impacts that you see from various efforts relating to virus control and epidemic or pandemic prevention in the future on the various manufacturing and food processing supply chains, specifically due to curtailing of ecological disruption of natural resources in less developed countries?
There are many components of that question. Some of it Jayson is the expert on, but let me start with the retail side. So in the retail store, there's certainly going to be a lot of cleaning and a lot of control of the number of people in the store. That's a given. My guess is customers are going to care about chain of custody and freshness and that information. And a lot of tools, you know, Mohammad can talk a lot more about blockchain, but those technologies and chain of custody will be key. Now, this concept of the way customers think about the store, one can think about that making its way upstream, all the way up to the manufacturer. Now, there is a possible silver lining here. A lot of people, as a result of reduced travel and manufacturing activity, have enjoyed the benefits of blue skies and fresh air, okay? And once you consume fresh air and see blue skies, there is the thought, and I hope it remains, that people will care about sustainability. And if they care about sustainability, they'd want to know how their food is grown, you know, what impact it's happening, all of those details. Now, if that is the case, so this is obviously a conjecture, that will go upstream in people caring about environmental effects of food. And that will bring in, now the thing to consider in all of this is you can have more environmentally conscious production of food. It might end up being more expensive. And now the question is, how are we going to balance all of these things? That is the question. As far as cleaners are concerned, there are a whole bunch of new UV and far UV cleaning solutions coming up. There are virucidal cleaners being used. So my expectation is cleanliness and hygiene will become part and parcel of whatever it is people are doing. They already were very high standards. I don't want to take away from the fact that food standards in the US and regulations already are set at a pretty high level, which is why you don't see people getting sick that frequently. When they get sick, there's a proactive role of pulling things out. I only think that this attention gets amped up. So I don't know whether it'll create a competitive benefit, because this will be like hygiene. All retailers will have to do it. All manufacturers will do it. The question I have is, will this carry forward with people wanting organic? I mean, in coffee, there's songbird friendly coffee, in case you didn't know, all kinds of interesting variants. And so will those products be preferred? That's the question whose answer I don't know. Only time will tell.
All right, thank you, Mohammad. Thank you, Ananth, I'm sorry. By the way, Jayson, if you have anything to add to what Ananth said on the first part of this question, please do so. But another question coming in is on the dairy side. Do you expect prices to recover soon? And what has been done about the shortage of gallon or quart jugs to package milk?
Yeah, well, maybe to piggyback a little bit on the first question, I think it's important for folks to realize that the animal industries have been acutely aware of and prepared for animal diseases. And we've unfortunately had a number of those in the past. And so all kinds of preparation plans and thinking about traceability, if those sorts of events happen. In the United States, it's actually tough to get on a hog or poultry farm because they're considered biosecure facilities to try to protect those animals from outside diseases. What's happened in this case, unfortunately, is this is diseases brought by people. And I think it's a little odd to think about these, no food system is perfect. All systems have trade-offs. But one of the advantages of the type of animal agricultural system we have now is it's one that tends to try to protect the animals from outside diseases. But it's also one that tends to be a little bit more, vertically integrated, coordinated within the sector. And that's in real contrast to some of the animal production systems we see in other parts of the world. Maybe a little more to your sector. I'm not an expert in dairy. Dairy pricing is a tough thing to say. I think there are about 5 economists in the world that understand U.S. dairy pricing policy. But I think it depends on these segments we've talked about. So early on, this demand hit. It depends whether your dairy and processing facility was mainly set up to deliver to away from home markets in things like little jugs or big boxes of cheese, not little jugs, the little cartons that went to schools or big boxes of cheese, or whether you're a dairy that was set up to deliver those gallon jugs to the grocery store. You saw really different impacts depending on whether you were supplying to one of those two types of processing facilities. So what we saw for most food products, though, is in mid to late March, prices got pulled up in the grocery stores. And then within, really by early April, fell back significantly again. Now in meat processing, then they got pulled up again because this was now the supply disruption, but started to fall back the last few days. But the question is right on the money in the sense that this has been one of the challenges that you can't just easily convert from food away from home to food at home. And one of the big constraints there is packaging. We saw this in eggs too. There's some legal issues, some regulatory barriers that prevented eggs from flowing from food away from home to food at home, but also a big constraint was just packaging. Do we have enough styrofoam and carton boxes in the dozen container size that we're accustomed to buying in grocery stores? And the answer was no. And that's the food companies, it doesn't make sense for them in normal times to be sitting on thousands and thousands of extra packaging material. It just doesn't make sense. And so, I think that's the constraint we've seen, not just in milk, but eggs in any number of cases, is that it's both the capital, do you have the machines to put the food in the packaging you want, and then also do you have the packaging itself? But again, I don't have intimate knowledge of that dairy processing sector, but you can certainly see in other sectors that it really took about a 2-week time period, 2 or 3 week to get back to something a little closer to normal.
Thank you, Jayson. The next question is for Professor Rahman. Do you think that the major shifts in purchasing behavior and supply chain processes suffered during this crisis will be permanent, or do you think they're going to slowly go back to normal after the epidemic?
Well, I guess, that's an interesting question. I guess it's a challenging question to answer as well. But my thinking is we're going to see some of the behavior sticking with consumers in terms of, so if we think about grocery shopping online, there have been tries now several times to move things online for groceries. So Webvan tried a few decades ago and then it failed. It was basically too early for its time. But when you look at today, like Amazon Fresh or Walmart Grocery is doing very well. Walmart, this is one place where they have done a very good job with utilizing their store in terms of the value proposition with the digital strategy. So I do believe that we're going to see consumers sticking with some of these conveniences because a lot of people had worries about trying these services. They wanted the right kind of apple or the tomato that they always picked. Now that they see that, the shopper who shops for them on an average probably is doing a decent job, they're okay with it. I think this is where, of course, the stores that are much better able to make sure the expectation of the consumers in terms of what kind of vegetables they're going to get and what they're picking for them is going to be able to manage it, that's going to stay more with the consumers. If the consumers start to get products that are not fulfilling their expectations, right? So the vegetables that are being picked are not really that good quality, then yes, you will see the going back to the old behavior. I think similarly for shopping on the retail side, like non-food items like Nordstrom and Macy's, I believe, you can already see the retailers that have made more progress with digitization are the ones that are weathering this COVID better. And the ones that have been struggling are really now on the verge of sort of going out of business. So we're going to see consumers getting more used to sort of taking the risk or understanding how they can shop better online. But again, we can also see that Amazon itself is trying to have footprint locally. The reason is, yes, when you think about a lot of these products, it's not enough to just have a lot of pictures or a lot of models wearing the product, because that can give the wrong impression about it. I'm going to look as beautiful as the model. So it is important to think about the fact that consumers are going to value the store as long as they create convenience and they're actually adding value for the customers. And I think the key here is convenience. So if the retailers are aware of these services where they create convenience, I think they're going to do well. And customers are very much aware of the convenience of shopping online now. The 80% that was always doing foot traffic for Macy's, probably now a good portion of that is now trying something online. And that's true for all retailers. And I think some of them will behave in the way that the retailers haven't seen before. So I would expect them to stick, and the retailers will be better served to expect that sort of shift in the behavior.
All right, thank you, Mohammad. Before we go to our next round, I wanted to say hello to a couple of new viewers from Texas and Vermont. So the U.S. continues to be well represented today. This question is for Professor Iyer. Ananth, how does a packing plant and or a meat distribution center develop secondary sales and distribution channels in the midst of a pandemic? And perhaps more importantly, in preparing for a future major disruption of supplies and or markets?
A great question. Some of my answers are going to come from what we have tried. So, for example, flour is an example. When there was shortage of bread flour, we have a bread machine, and I try to put the flour so you get fresh bread. We decided we'll look on the web, and we found a mill that would ship you 25-pound bags if you bought them in that volume. And so we got used to doing that. One of the things that showed up is community-supported agriculture, where they deliver a food box. Well, there's a place you can go, click on it, and get a community. So I think these are new channels that are emerging. One thing to sort of piggyback what Mohammad says, the moment you allow a disruption, the moment you allow digitization, you've really opened up a whole bunch of new channels. And I'm bullish on those channels. I'm bullish on the fact that we discovered this milling company that supposedly mills and ships to you. And there is FedEx delivers to your home. So now a click and we get flour. Same is true. So earlier we thought flour is something you go to the grocery retail store to get. So I'm bullish about all these new opportunities. The part I'm not completely sure of is, will they support scale? So this little mill in Illinois that's shipping to me, now, by the way, when I went to the web, I could get it from Illinois, from Montana, from North Carolina, etc. The challenge was shipping costs were too much, right? Now, if in fact these mills can scale, I really think, what prevents you from having connections to strawberry farmers in different places, etc.? Do you need the store to be the distributor that brings it all together? That is the question. My guess is we'll end up with a hybrid solution. Certain things you'll still go to the store, certain things, and people might, Jayson talked about meats. Maybe there are some specialty meat producers and butchers people go to. This disintermediation digitally can have serious consequences for the store. Now, how to compete? I think it is, that's when you talk to people like Mohammad. How do you get visibility nationally if you are a small player? you have to pay Google, or you have to pay Facebook, or you have to pay someone to get visibility, or you need to be featured as a brand. So some way customers need to find you. But once they find you and you can create a sort of a social network that supports you, I think this would be great. How universities and various ag groups and co-ops can increase their visibility digitally and ensure that you're getting high quality food. That's the question. But no, it does open up new channels, and whether those channels will stick is the question. But we certainly plan to stick to a few of these channels because the products we got were such high quality. And plus, there was a nice story to go with the owners of the mill. So now we have a story. It's no longer Pillsbury, but we know Jeannie's mill somewhere made this stuff, and I feel a connection to them. So if that happens, that'll be interesting supply chain connections that start.
Thank you, Ananth. The next question is for Professor Lusk. Jayson, what would you suggest to consumers at this time as beef prices are high and may continue to be high? Should consumers be relying on local farmers and going in on the cost of a cow or a pig?
I think that gets a little bit to Ananth's question. If that option is available to you and you have those connections, go for it. I mean, the folks that I've talked to that do that kind of direct to consumer markets, they've been inundated with calls. So I'm not trying to discourage folks, but good luck if you don't already have a relationship with one of those kinds of processors. There hopefully will be more of those kind of opportunities in the future. What should you do? Rising prices are the signal that you and I should cut back and try something else. It signals that there's scarcity at the moment. And that's what prices do. Prices ration scarce resources, and that rising price is telling us there's not as much to go around. And if you can't use prices to ration, you use other mechanisms like the signs that Ananth pointed to in the grocery store that you can only buy 2 packages. That's the grocery store saying, okay, we don't want to appear like we're gouging the consumer, so we're going to use some other mechanism to control price. So, one option is you consume less, you consume something different. Poultry prices, if you're looking for protein, poultry prices have not increased nearly at the rate the others have. Egg prices rose significantly in mid-March, but they've subsequently come down. And then, of course, there are other options in the grocery store. And I think that's one of the amazing things about our food system is if you have some disruptions in one sector, we have lots of options available to us to choose and try different things. Maybe it's not your favorite variety. Maybe it's not what you normally do. But by the way, that high price, that's also the signal that those processors need to get back up and running is, they're leaving money on the table by not being able to run full capacity. So, there's the old saying that the cure for high prices is high prices. That's the inducement that processors and others need to get back in business. I will say, maybe I'll add one more thing there. One of the things that's happened in packing plants, even those that have been able to get back up and running, is they've had to reduce the number of workers in the plant and space them out. The consequence for that is if you look in grocery stores, there's a lot more packaging in whole muscle cuts and vacuum packaged bags because they don't have the labor in the plants to just further disassemble those cuts. So actually, if you have a little bit of knowledge about, cooking and dealing with large meat cuts, there are some deals to be made if you're willing to buy a whole roast or a whole loin, chop it up, put part of it in the freezer, cook part of it now. We've done a little bit of that in our family. So that's another option for consumers is rather than buying those individual steaks or something like that, buy that big muscle cut. Yeah, it's a big price point, but the price per pound is often something significantly lower if you're willing to do some of the processing yourself and move some of that into a freezer.
Jayson, thank you. Let's go back to Professor Iyer for the next question. And we have a lot of not only alums, but current students that are tuning in, and they're interested in, because of the pandemic, what kinds of supply chain management jobs will disappear and what new jobs might be created because of this situation?
So first, overall, I think there'll be a lot of new jobs being created, but it's just that the skill set will be wider. It'll be very difficult to separate doing supply chain management from doing the kinds of things Mohammad talks about. These two will not be separated. So, enabling people to find products is one part of creating demand. Supplying them and coordinating the logistics is the other part. In fact, one of my students in the past said that a good way to describe a company like Amazon is as an efficient mover of boxes. But most people would describe Amazon as very effective with the web, etc. And the reason is because both go hand in hand. So I think that's the one thing. Now, Mohammad talked about a digitization strategy. Along with the digitization strategy comes a fulfillment strategy. And so these two go hand in hand. So I really think that people who are skilled in this integrated view would do well. But a third piece is data analytics. We have a successful business analytics and information management program. Mohammad plays a very key role in that. I think that those jobs too, I can see a lot of growth. Now, but the one thing that I would suggest to our students looking in this field is, don't be shy about getting your hands dirty, understanding how the warehouse works, understanding how the processing plant works, because details like that embedded within the supply chain and fulfillment is really what companies need right now. I think Purdue is uniquely positioned. I would strongly say, the Department of Agricultural Economics shares the Krannert building with us. I say go take classes in Jayson's department and get yourself to understand the supply chain as a whole, because along with this, when automation comes into play and blockchain and other tools come in, there's no excuse for saying, I'm going to sit in one building, take a few courses, and expect to get a job. Wandering around and taking into account the intellectual breadth across Purdue, I think I'm very bullish on that. Now, things might look a little dark right now, but the good news is that most students who've been offered full-time jobs, none of those jobs have been pulled. A few people who've got internships, some cases have been delayed a little bit. So I really think there's the hope that things will come back. How quickly, we don't know, whether there's a Nike swoosh or whatever the other option, but well-trained students with a breadth of capabilities, I'm very bullish about their future.
Ananth, thank you. And let me apologize to Mohammad because I lost my rotation there momentarily. So we'll double up with Professor Rahman on this one. The first question is, you made a comment earlier on what brick and mortar stores need to do from an experience side to keep customers in the store versus going online. How would that extra cost be offset by an already struggling brick and mortar model?
That's a great question, but I think the question about pricing. So Ananth mentioned his flour buying, and I'm sure he's paying a higher price than what he would pay to Walmart or Kroger for that same flour if he was to buy it, right? So, but the point here is the quality and the experience. If we look at before pandemic, if you look at the malls closing, the stores closing, we saw a lot of those news like Sears closing business, Toys R Us going out of business. However, at the same time, we saw an expansion in the whole country of luxury shopping malls and sort of destinations where people can go relax and really enjoy and having an experience. So it's unlikely that we're going to be so used to sitting inside our house and be fine with just looking at virtual realities. We're going to soon need, and we're seeing this already, states opening, a lot of people are going out just to get the fresh air. Even if they understand the health risks, they still want to go out and experience something. So if the stores are able to provide the value, you provide distinct product and the distinct value, then you reduce the price pressure. The price pressure is there when you're providing very comparable products. And at that point, if it's scalable, so if some retailer has this scale, economy of scale, yes, they're gonna have a much more competitive price. That is a struggling factor for the other retailer. And that's what we saw for a lot of these retailers that are struggling. So I would argue, GSCMI and Kohl's both are kind of struggling right now. And I know I'm putting my neck out there, but it's partly because their product assortment is very, very comparable to to some of the larger retailers like Walmart or Target, where consumers don't see a lot of substitution cost. So you have to create this cost for consumers where they feel like, if I don't go to this retail store, I don't really get the product and the service that I'm looking for. That's how you create the value of the store. I mean, that's where Amazon Fresh or Amazon is trying to come have the footprint offline. Now, do I think that we're not going to see some restructuring of the stores? I think we're going to see restructuring. Probably we're going to see much more smaller, tighter retail stores where we have a lot more of like a display rather than maybe a lot of product assortment behind the scene. But I think this is where, going back to Ananth's point, for our students, I want to piggyback on one thing. It's really important to understand the full business. You have to understand how demand is created, how demand is impacted. If the supply chain doesn't work well, no matter how great of a website you have, how well you do with curation, how well you do digitization and recommendation systems, it's going to all fail because customers are going to be very, very unhappy with the retail. And, I'm already seeing, if you read reviews, a lot of the times I see negative reviews where it's all about wrong size, wrong color. What happened? Well, basically the distribution center failed. And what you're doing is you're now reducing future demand. So I think this is where it's very critical for retailers to be careful about creating value. And I think they'll be able to reduce some of the price pressures.
Mohammad, thanks. We're actually at our time, but I'm going to go one more question for Mohammad and then one more question quickly for Jayson. I want to talk a little bit about age differentiation. I have two kids in their 20s who have spent their whole life buying things online and have no problem doing that. How do you build trust with maybe an older consumer who has been reluctant to buy online and may be forced now to do that in this situation?
This is a great question, Tim, and this goes back to my sort of earlier comment about trendsetters versus people who want to sort of stay with their traditional ways. I think the critical thing here is that this whole pandemic is a forced experiment. A lot of us have been forced to do things that we otherwise wouldn't have tried. I mean, I myself never tried ordering grocery online just because I didn't have to, but now I regularly do. So, and that's the same thing for a lot of these customers who are in a different generation or in a different age group. They are forced to do this, but then they don't know how well to do this. And that can create frustration. And I think this is where creating these large scalable concierge systems that where you really target these consumers and try to make sure that they don't get frustrated is critical. That's how you make sure they're happy. And also this is, like some of the age group might be also more worried about the virus and the health risks. This is where, making sure you can create like any kind of safety assurances for them to go back to the store and have the test drive, not try all the products, not touch all the products, assure that, these are products no one has tried or touched, so you're safe. I think that will go a long way. And this is the group that is actually willing to pay more. They're less price sensitive often than the younger crowd who's always looking around.
As a part of the older crowd, I'm not sure I'm always willing to pay more, but I think those are great comments. Last question is for Professor Lusk. Will the lessons learned from this pandemic result in less food waste in the U.S. supply chain?
Boy, that's tough to know. I think what we saw when consumers were, for all the reasons Ananth mentioned, running to the grocery store, one thing it tells me is that we prioritize having enough food when we needed it over waste. And you have to understand what waste means. So grocery stores and the rest of the supply chain had been optimizing to reduce waste. But optimizing to reduce waste means you don't have as much excess inventory on hand when there are these peak demand spikes. So I think we need to be really careful about what we're talking about here. And if you want a system where there's essentially zero food waste, it's also a system that doesn't have a lot of wiggle room when you have a peak demand spike like we just saw. So, I'm not trying to say we shouldn't try to find ways to reduce food waste, but I'm also saying that these are inherent tensions in the system. And we saw it play out in a very significant way, as we did earlier. Moreover, some of the waste that we saw on the farm losses because of plowing under vegetables, that was due to demand destruction. Restaurants were not open. there's not much you can do about that. That's just an unexpected, shock to the demand sector that's, unfortunately was impossible to predict. And because of agricultural decisions that were made months ago, we have this consequence of unfortunate losses. So yeah, hopefully, there's some things we could do, better packaging so you can store better. Again, I think this automation thing so that we have less reliance on workers, all these things can help us a little bit make sure we don't run into some of these problems in the future. But I think we also have to understand that this is not some kind of easy solution. There are some real inherent trade-offs in reducing food waste.
Well, thank you, Jayson. I want to thank Professors Iyer, Lusk, and Rahman for fantastic comments today. I knew that we would have many more questions than we would have time, and that has been the case. But I thank everyone for tuning in. Again, the full session will remain available for viewing on the Purdue Krannert Facebook page. It'll also be available very shortly on the Krannert YouTube channel and the Krannert website. I want to thank the Global Supply Chain Management Initiative in the Krannert School and the Department of Agricultural Economics for their help and their support in making this happen. So to all of you watching, we hope you remain safe. Please enjoy the spring and summer, and thank you for watching today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.